The morning started like any other inside the small cafe, tucked between two crowded shops on a busy street. The workers were moving around quickly, wiping tables, grinding coffee beans, and preparing for the usual rush. The sound of chatter mixed with the smell of fresh pastries, creating that familiar atmosphere people enjoyed. But no one inside the cafe knew that the day would turn into something they would talk about for years. Around mid-morning, the bell over the door chimed softly as a man walked in. He looked calm, maybe even a little tired, like someone who had spent a long time on the road or had carried many thoughts in his mind. His clothes were simple and plain, not the kind that drew attention. He didn't look wealthy, and he didn't look like someone who came to impress anyone. He looked like an ordinary person just trying to get through the day. A few customers looked up when he entered, but their attention drifted back to their phones and conversations. The man stood near the counter for a moment, as if he was taking in the atmosphere before ordering. There was a small line, and he waited quietly without showing impatience. He just held his hands together and looked around. Almost studying the room yacht at the far corner of the cafe stood an old upright piano. It wasn't in perfect condition, and sometimes people joked that it sounded more tired than the customers. Every now and then, someone would sit and play a few simple notes, but nothing impressive ever came from it. It had become more of a decoration than a musical instrument. A couple of young cafe workers stood near the counter preparing drinks. One leaned toward the other and whispered something while glancing at the man. They weren't being rude, but their tone carried that playful energy of people who felt sure of themselves in their own small world. The man didn't notice, or maybe didn't care. His eyes were fixed on the piano. When his turn came, he stepped forward and ordered a small coffee. His voice was gentle, not too loud, not too soft, just steady. The worker behind the counter gave him his change, and he nodded politely before stepping aside. Instead of sitting down immediately, he looked again at the piano, his attention lingering longer this time. He walked toward it slowly, almost with respect. His steps were light, and his expression remained calm. A few customers glanced over, curious. One of the workers nudged another and pointed at him. "Looks like someone wants to try the piano again," one whispered. Their tone wasn't mean, just amused, as if expecting to hear the usual clumsy notes. The man stood beside the piano and placed his coffee on the small table next to it. He ran his fingers along the wooden edge of the instrument, feeling the scratches and dents that told stories of years gone by. He didn't sit down right away. Instead, he looked at the keys like he was greeting an old friend he hadn't seen in a long time. A small group of teenagers sitting nearby noticed him and began to snicker quietly. They whispered things among themselves, trying to guess what kind of tune he might attempt. One of them even mimicked pressing random keys with exaggerated movements, making his friends laugh. The man didn't react. He finally pulled the bench back slightly and sat down. The bench made a soft creaking sound under his weight. For a moment, he just rested his hands on his knees. His shoulders rose and fell with a slow breath, as though he was preparing himself for something personal. The crowd wasn't paying much attention yet, but a few eyes were already fixed on him. The cafe lights reflected softly on the piano keys, some of which had faded from years of use. The man placed his fingertips gently on them, but he didn't press yet. The workers at the counter shared another glance. One of them smirked, saying quietly, "Here we go again. Let's hope he doesn't play the same two notes for 10 minutes like the last guy." The man didn't smile or frown. His face stayed calm, but there was something different about his eyes now. A sense of longing, or perhaps an old memory, was waking up inside him. The cafe continued bustling around him, but for a moment he seemed to drift into a quiet place of his own. Before he played anything, he lifted his hands and rested them lightly on the keys again. His fingertips hovered with a softness that didn't match the casual, uninterested atmosphere around him. Most people thought he was just preparing to tap out a simple melody like everyone else. No one expected anything special. At a nearby table, an elderly woman sipped her tea and watched him with curiosity. She didn't laugh or whisper. She simply observed with calm interest, as though she sensed something different about this man. Her eyes followed every small movement he made. The man finally pressed a single key. The sound was soft but clear. It wasn't played with force, but with intention. A couple of heads turned. He pressed another key, then another, forming a slow, thoughtful pattern. It was nothing dramatic, but something about it felt different. It carried a gentle confidence, but he didn't continue right away. He paused again, letting the small melody settle in the air. The cafe didn't go silent, but a mild shift happened just enough for people to start wondering if they should pay a little more attention. One of the workers leaned on the counter, arms crossed, half amused and half curious. "Maybe he's better than he looks," he whispered to his coworker. The coworker just shrugged, clearly not expecting much. The man's fingers moved again, pressing a few more notes, forming a pattern that sounded almost familiar, but also unique. A child sitting with his mother turned his head toward the sound, drawn by the tone of the music. His mother smiled softly, surprised by how pleasant it sounded. Still, no one in the cafe understood the full picture yet. They didn't know who the man was, or why he seemed so connected to the old piano. They didn't know that this moment meant something to him, more than just passing time. As he sat there, his shoulders relaxed more. His breathing steadied. The simple notes he had played were like the warm-up of someone who had done this many times before, someone who understood music on a deeper level. But no one in the cafe had seen enough yet to realize this. People continued with their conversations, though now a few were paying more attention. They whispered guesses about whether he was a beginner or if he was just trying to impress someone. The teenagers, who had laughed earlier, started leaning forward slightly, unsure if they should keep joking or actually listen. The man still didn't rush. He kept his hands resting lightly on the keys, his eyes focused on them as if remembering something lost or hidden. His posture changed subtly. His shoulders eased back. His fingers curved with gentle control. It was like watching a spark that hadn't fully turned into a flame. The cafe was filled with everyday noise, cups clinking, coffee machines humming, chairs sliding, but the man didn't seem distracted. He existed in his own quiet space, waiting for the right moment. And even though he had only played a few simple notes, something in the air had shifted, like the calm before a surprise. One of the workers near the counter finally asked aloud, "Do you think he can really play?" The question made another customer look over. They both watched the man, waiting for what might come next. The elderly woman watching him nodded slightly to herself, as if she already had an answer, but no one else could see it. She leaned back in her chair and continued to watch patiently, her eyes soft with understanding. The man pressed another note, then another, creating a slow rhythm that hinted at a bigger melody. Each note carried a warmth that didn't match his quiet appearance. He still wasn't showing the full extent of what he could do, but he was no longer hiding the fact that he had skill. A few more customers turned their attention toward him, sensing that something interesting was happening. The laughter faded. The teasing stopped. They waited, even if they didn't know exactly why. The man lifted his hands one final time, letting them hover above the keys like a painter about to make the first stroke on a blank canvas. His eyes softened and his posture straightened just a little more. Something subtle but powerful changed in his expression. Anyone watching closely could feel it. The quiet moment before something meaningful begins. The kind of moment where a person steps out of the shadows and reveals a piece of themselves. And though the audience still didn't know who he was or what he was capable of, the man knew one thing with absolute certainty. He was ready to let the music speak for him again. The cafe was still filled with the normal morning sounds, but something felt slightly different now. People didn't know why they were paying attention to a man who hadn't even played a full melody yet. Maybe it was the pause he held. Maybe it was the calm way he sat. Or maybe it was the feeling that he wasn't just another person randomly pressing keys. Whatever it was, their curiosity quietly grew. The man gently rested his hands on the keys again. He didn't look around or check if anyone was watching. He simply closed his eyes for a second, as though he was letting his thoughts settle. When he opened them again, there was a softness in his expression, but also a hint of something stronger perhaps, a memory or a feeling he had carried for a long time. He played a single note once more, but this time he didn't stop. He added another, then another. The notes flowed slowly, like someone taking careful steps after a long rest. They weren't loud or showy, just warm and thoughtful. The melody grew gently, like a small flame gaining strength. A couple sitting near the window looked up mid-conversation, listening. The woman nudged her partner with a small smile, surprised that the familiar old piano could sound this gentle. A teenager who had been joking earlier lowered his phone and leaned back, unsure why he suddenly wanted to listen. The workers behind the counter paused between tasks. One of them tilted his head slightly. "He's not bad," he whispered quietly, not wanting the man to hear. Another nodded, though still unsure if this was just the beginning of a tune that would soon fall apart. But the melody didn't fall apart. It continued with subtle grace. His fingers moved with a natural rhythm, as though they had known these patterns for years. He wasn't trying to play something impressive. He wasn't trying to get attention. It felt more like he was playing for himself, reconnecting with something he had left behind. The elderly woman who had been watching him earlier smiled softly. She didn't clap or say anything. She just sat with her tea, her eyes warm with recognition, as though the music reminded her of someone or something from long ago. The man's movements stayed gentle, but every now and then his fingers made a smooth, confident slide across the keys. Anyone who paid close attention could see that his hands weren't uncertain. They knew what they were doing. They remembered. His left hand added a soft depth to the melody, giving it a fuller sound that filled the quiet corners of the cafe. It still wasn't loud or dramatic, but it carried a quiet strength. A strength that came from years of practice years that no one watching knew anything about. One of the baristas leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the counter. "Do you think he's a teacher or something?" he asked in a low voice. Another shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe he's just one of those natural players." They both kept watching, forgetting the napkins they were supposed to be stacking. The music picked up just a little, enough to make a few more heads turn. A young child sitting with his father pointed at the piano, his eyes wide with interest. "It sounds nice," he whispered. His father nodded, surprised by the sound coming from the worn-out instrument. Still, the cafe wasn't silent yet. People were listening, but they weren't fully drawn in. The man himself was still holding back, playing softly as though he was testing the waters, seeing if he still remembered how to let the music breathe. His hands slowed again, resting lightly on the keys. Instead of continuing the melody, he paused, lifting his fingers slightly. Some customers frowned, confused. Was he finished? Was he unsure of what to play next? The teens at the back whispered to each other, guessing the music had ended, but the elderly woman near the piano leaned forward, paying close attention. She didn't believe he was finished. She watched his posture, the way his fingers hovered just above the surface. She saw something no one else could see, the quiet tension in his arms, the slight shift in his shoulders. She recognized the signs of someone about to begin something meaningful. The man took a slow breath. His chest rose and fell like someone preparing to speak after years of silence. He looked at the keys again, and his expression softened. His fingers curved gracefully, ready. He began again, but this time, the sound was different. The notes flowed with clearer purpose. The melody was stronger, more certain, like someone who had found their voice again. His fingers moved more confidently, dancing across the keys with a gentle speed that surprised the people watching. The cafe grew quieter. The workers who had been whispering stopped. The teenagers who had been joking leaned forward, their eyes widening. The couple near the window exchanged amazed glances. The child who had been pointing at the piano sat up straighter, listening more closely. The music no longer sounded like a warm-up. It sounded like something personal, like a story without words. The notes rose and fell with emotion, as though the man was expressing something he had kept locked inside for too long. His hands moved faster now, but they didn't rush. Each note was placed with care. His left hand added depth, producing a rich sound that made the cafe feel different. A few people instinctively held their breath, not wanting to interrupt the moment. One of the workers whispered, "This doesn't sound like someone just trying things out." Another nodded, unable to look away. For the first time since he sat down, they realized they might have been wrong about him. The elderly woman watching him placed her cup gently on the table. Her eyes glistened slightly, but she blinked it away. She knew what she was hearing. She had heard this kind of playing before years ago, in places filled with people who appreciated music deeply. She didn't say a word. She just listened. The man didn't look up. He didn't acknowledge the growing attention. He was completely inside the music. His face remained calm, but his hands told a different story. They moved with passion, skill, and memory. They shaped the air around him with sound that felt both fragile and powerful. The cafe's usual noise faded. People stopped talking mid-sentence. Someone who had been typing on a laptop slowed their hands until they stopped completely. Even the coffee machine finishing a cycle sounded louder than it should have. All eyes were gradually turning toward the man at the piano. He played a gentle run of notes, smooth and clear. Then he moved into a sweeping pattern that surprised everyone. It wasn't the kind of playing someone does for fun. It was the kind of playing someone does when they've spent countless hours practicing, learning, understanding, and living through music. The teenagers at the back sat up straight. One whispered, "Whoa, he's actually good." Another just nodded, mouth slightly open. The workers behind the counter looked at each other with wide eyes. One whispered, "Okay. This is unreal." The manager, who had been in the back room, peeked out to see what was happening. He paused in the doorway, watching with silent curiosity. The man's playing grew even more emotional. The notes carried longing, joy, sadness, hope, all woven together. Each person in the cafe felt something slightly different, as though the music touched each person in its own way. People who had been strangers minutes ago now shared silent glances of amazement. Some smiled. Some softened their expressions. Others simply stared, forgetting everything else around them. Still, the man played on, unaware of the impact he was having. Or perhaps he knew, but chose not to think about it. His music wasn't loud or dramatic. It wasn't a performance meant to impress. It was honest. It was human. As the melody shifted, he played a soft sequence that felt like a question, followed by another that felt like an answer. The elderly woman closed her eyes for a moment, soaking in the beauty of it. The cafe was no longer just a cafe. It felt like a small concert hall where everyone had gathered by accident. The people inside didn't know they were witnessing the beginning of something unforgettable. The man played for several minutes, his fingers moving with gentle precision. His breathing stayed steady. His shoulders relaxed more with every passing moment. It was clear he had missed this, not the piano itself, but the feeling of letting music flow freely. Eventually, his playing slowed again. The notes softened until they faded into the air. He finished with one final delicate chord that lingered like a whisper. He lifted his hands from the keys slowly, almost reluctantly, as if leaving behind a piece of himself. The cafe fell silent, not because the music had been loud, but because it had touched everyone deeply. No one clapped yet. No one spoke. They simply stared, trying to understand what they had just experienced. The man looked down at the keys for a moment, his expression thoughtful. He didn't seem proud or embarrassed, just quietly peaceful, as if he had finally let something out that had been hidden for too long. The elderly woman near the piano smiled gently. She knew the silence wouldn't last long. She knew what would come next. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes warm and full of memory. She whispered, just loud enough for a few people to hear. He wasn't just playing. He was remembering. And the cafe, still frozen in awe, waited for whatever would happen next. For a few long seconds, no one in the cafe moved. The man sat still at the piano, his hands resting gently on his lap, as though he was unsure if he should play more or quietly stand up and return to being invisible again. It was a strange moment, soft, heavy, and almost fragile. The kind of moment people feel but can't describe. The silence did not come from confusion, but from quiet wonder. Everyone had heard music before, good music, bad music, simple tunes, and random notes. But what they had heard from this man felt different. It felt like something honest had been shared with them. Even though they knew nothing about him, the workers behind the counter stood frozen, drinks half prepared. The barista who had been amused earlier now stared with wide eyes, unsure how to process the shift that had taken place. The teenagers near the back table, who had joked loudly just minutes earlier, now whispered quietly among themselves, careful not to break the moment. Finally, one sound broke the silence. A soft exhale from the elderly woman sitting close to the piano. She looked at the man with eyes filled not just with curiosity, but with recognition, like she had seen something beautiful and familiar. The man noticed her gaze and offered a small nod. Not a smile, just a simple acknowledgement. Then he looked down at the keys again, almost unsure whether to stand up or continue. Before he could decide, the door of the cafe opened, and a cold breeze rushed inside as another customer entered. The moment broke. People shifted in their seats, turning their heads, clearing their throats, pretending they hadn't all been caught in the same quiet spell. The barista blinked rapidly and returned to wiping the counter, though he kept glancing at the piano. The teenagers picked up their drinks and sat up straighter, trying to act like they hadn't been stunned. The couple near the window exchanged whispered words about how unexpected it had been. But even though the spell had broken, something had changed. The man wasn't just an ordinary customer anymore. Not to them. Not after the music they had heard. One of the workers stepped forward slightly. "Sir, that was really something," he said awkwardly, unsure how to express what he felt. The man simply nodded without looking up. He reached for his coffee, lifting it gently, and took a small sip. His hands were steady, but his breathing was still settling. It was clear to anyone watching that playing had brought out old emotions he wasn't used to facing. He set the cup back down and placed his fingers on the keys again. But this time, he didn't press anything. He just let them rest, like someone touching a treasured object from long ago. A few customers turned back toward him with curiosity. "Is he going to play again?" One whispered, "I hope so." Another murmured. Even the manager, who usually stayed in the back, stepped closer to the cafe floor, pretending to check something on a shelf while keeping an eye on the man. The man sat still for a moment longer. Then he pressed a soft chord, gentle, deep, and full of feeling. The room responded instantly. Conversations faded. Movements slowed. People turned. The man, didn't look around to see their reactions. He just let his fingers move again, slowly at first, like he was guiding himself back into the music. The notes came with emotion, but not like before. This time, they carried a touch of sadness, like a memory that had resurfaced. His left hand added a soft harmony, filling the quiet room with sound that felt like a whisper of something long lost. His right hand moved with care, forming a delicate melody that made the air feel heavy in the best way. The elderly woman watched him with a new kind of attention. She didn't just listen, she understood. Every rise and fall in his playing seemed to reflect something she recognized, the quiet longing of someone who once lived a different life. A young boy sitting with his father leaned forward. "Why does it sound sad?" he asked softly. His father wrapped an arm around him. "Because sometimes music tells stories," he said, "even if we don't know the words." The boy nodded, though he didn't fully understand. But he listened more closely. As the melody deepened, the man's expression changed. His calm look shifted into something more emotional, not dramatic, but meaningful. His eyes softened, and his breath grew steadier. It was as though the music was pulling things out of him that he had held inside for too long. His fingers moved a little faster now, shaping a sequence of notes that sounded like a memory returning piece by piece. The customers listening could sense it too. They didn't know him, but they felt something in the music, hint of pain, a whisper of joy, a story of someone who had experienced life in quiet ways they couldn't see. The teenagers, who usually filled the cafe with noise, now watched with a strange fascination. One of them whispered, "It's like he's been doing this forever." Another nodded, "Yeah, it's crazy. How did we not expect this?" At the counter, a barista sighed softly, overwhelmed but unable to look away. "If we had known he could play like this," he murmured. "Yeah," the other replied quietly. "We wouldn't have joked." The man continued, unaware of their regret or admiration. His world had narrowed to the keys under his fingers and the emotions he had kept hidden inside. He shifted into a lighter melody, now gentle, hopeful, almost like sunlight breaking through clouds. The change surprised the listeners. It was like watching someone move from sadness to acceptance, from pain to peace. People felt their hearts lift with the sound. Then, without warning, the melody rose higher. His fingers moved swiftly and gracefully, gliding across the keys with a confidence that stunned the cafe. The sound grew fuller, richer, more powerful, yet still beautiful. The cafe fell completely silent. The man leaned slightly closer to the piano. His fingers blurred with motion, dancing over the keys with a skill that could never belong to a beginner or casual player. This was the playing of someone who lived through music, someone who had spent years perfecting every movement. The teenager stood up now, unable to sit still while watching. A few customers covered their mouths in surprise. The barista stared, frozen in place. Even the manager stopped pretending to organize things and walked closer, watching with awe. People who had doubted earlier now felt a mix of shock and admiration. They couldn't take their eyes off him. Some felt their chests tighten with emotion they didn't fully understand. The elderly woman closed her eyes, letting the strong melody fill her heart. She had lived long enough to know that not everyone who walks quietly is ordinary. Some people carry greatness inside them, hidden from the world until the right moment arrives. And this moment was his dot. The man's playing became even stronger. His fingers moved with flawless speed, every note landing perfectly. The melody surged with passion, raw, honest, powerful. It wasn't just music anymore. It was a confession. A story, a memory, a truth. Some customers whispered, "How is he doing this? Who is he?" Others simply listened, unable to speak. The room felt completely transformed. The cafe lights looked softer somehow. The air felt warmer. The people inside felt closer to each other without speaking. Then, just as the music reached its most powerful point, the man slowed down. The notes softened again, becoming gentle and thoughtful. His hands moved with delicate care, like someone placing something precious back in its place. The melody faded into a calm, peaceful ending. When the final chord settled into the air, no one moved. It was as though the entire cafe had taken a deep breath and wasn't ready to let it out yet. The man sat quietly, his hands still hovering above the keys. His shoulders rose and fell slowly. His face didn't show pride or excitement. Instead, it showed calm acceptance, like he had finally let go of something heavy. One person clapped softly, then another, and suddenly the cafe erupted in gentle applause. Not loud or wild, just warm, grateful, and full of respect. The man looked up, surprised. He hadn't expected applause. He hadn't expected attention. He certainly hadn't expected admiration. He offered a small, humble nod as the applause continued. The elderly woman smiled with quiet warmth. She didn't clap. Instead, she whispered something to herself, something only she could hear. The customers began turning to one another, whispering in excitement. Where did he learn to play like that? Is he famous? I've never seen anything like this here. Do you think he used to perform somewhere? He must have. The workers behind the counter exchanged looks filled with disbelief. We really misjudged him. Yeah, we did. The man didn't listen to their whispers. Instead, he gently stood up from the bench. He picked up his coffee and took another sip. As though the applause was happening somewhere far away, it took several seconds for the cafe to calm again. But even then, everyone knew something had changed. This man, this quiet, ordinary-looking man, was not ordinary at all, and what they had witnessed was only the beginning of the story they didn't yet know. The next morning came quietly, with the soft sound of rain tapping against the cafe windows. The sky was a pale gray, and the whole street outside looked washed and calm. Inside the cafe, the lights were warm, creating a gentle glow that made the place feel safe and familiar. Even before the doors opened, there was a sense that something important was going to happen, though no one could explain why the young man arrived early, long before any customers would walk in. He stepped inside with a careful quietness, as if he didn't want to disturb anything. His eyes moved toward the piano right away. It wasn't a grand one, just a simple upright piano placed near the wall, but he looked at it with the same calm gratitude he had shown the day before. He walked toward it slowly and touched the keys, with the tip of one finger checking the feel of them, the same way some people greet a friend they haven't seen in years. There was no rush in his movements, no sign of a performance coming. Just a soft moment between a musician and the instrument he loved. The cafe owner entered soon after, carrying a box of fresh supplies. She noticed him standing there and stopped. For a moment she only watched him, remembering the quiet shock from the night before. She hadn't expected such talent, such emotion, such control from someone who looked so ordinary. Today, she wasn't sure what to say. He turned and offered a simple smile. I hope it's okay that I'm early, he said politely. Of course, she replied, still feeling a faint mix of surprise and curiosity. You can sit anywhere. You don't have to play if you don't want to. The young man nodded. I understand. Then he gently closed the piano cover, letting it rest. He didn't seem offended or disappointed. Instead, he looked around the cafe, admiring the cozy decorations, the small lamps, the simple photos on the wall. It's a peaceful place, he said. The owner softened. She wasn't used to being unsure around customers, but something about him made her careful with her words. It is. People like that about it. He picked a corner table, the same one from yesterday, and sat quietly. When she brought him a warm drink, he thanked her politely. That was all. No mention of music, no hint of what he had done yesterday. It almost made the cafe owner wonder if she had imagined the whole thing. But she hadn't. And the moment the first regular customers entered, she knew it. The older man who always read the morning newspaper sat down, but paused, looking at the covered piano. Then he looked at the young man. His eyebrows lifted slightly. Is that him? The one who played last evening? He asked in a quiet but excited voice. The owner nodded. Words spread fast after that. Not in a loud or interruptive way, but through those quiet moments people share when they think something special might be happening. A whisper here, a small pointing gesture there. A few customers stepped closer to get a better look at him. Some pretended they weren't watching, but clearly were. The young man didn't seem to notice any of it. Or maybe he did, but chose to ignore it. He simply sat there, sipping the warm drink with calm hands. But his eyes seemed distant, thinking about something far away. A young woman approached the owner at the counter. Is he going to play again? She whispered. I don't know, the owner admitted. He hasn't said anything. Maybe you should ask, the woman suggested, but the owner hesitated. Yesterday she had laughed at him, not out of cruelty, but because she thought it was a harmless joke. She had assumed he was just another customer trying to be funny. Even now, she felt a little embarrassed, remembering the way she had replied to him. She didn't want to make another mistake. Instead, the morning continued quietly. People sat with their drinks, though they kept glancing in his direction every few minutes. The piano stayed untouched, sitting silently under its closed cover. It wasn't until late morning that something changed. A small group of students entered the cafe, full of energy and chatter. They didn't know anything about last night. They didn't recognize the young man or understand why half the room kept watching him. They simply ordered their drinks and sat at the table, nearest to the piano. One of the students drummed his fingers loudly on the piano cover without thinking. Just a nervous habit. But the sound was sharp and out of rhythm. Without even looking up, the young man said, "Try tapping like this." Then he demonstrated a gentle rhythm on his table, soft, steady, smoother. The student blinked. Okay. He tried copying the rhythm, laughing a little. That sounds way better. The young man smiled faintly. Patterns always matter, even small ones. Something about the comment caught the room's attention. The students looked at him more closely. Do you play? One of them asked casually. He seemed to take a moment before answering. Sometimes, like, good? The student pressed. The young man gave a tiny shrug, almost shy. I just try to play what I feel. That was the moment when one of the older customers finally stepped in. He's more than good, the older man said from across the room. You should have heard him yesterday. The whole cafe went quiet. The students looked at the young man with new curiosity. Really? One asked. Can you play something now? He didn't respond right away. His eyes drifted toward the piano, and his hand rested gently on his cup. He seemed torn, unsure if playing again was the right thing to do. The cafe owner held her breath, watching him. She still hadn't apologized properly for laughing yesterday. She wanted to say something, but she didn't want to push him. Finally, the young man looked up. If it bothers anyone, he said softly, I won't play. Bothers? The middle-aged man sitting near the window said with a laugh. You're the only reason half of us came back early today. Everyone chuckled quietly, but kindly. The cafe owner stepped forward then, finally gathering the courage she needed. If you want to play, she said gently, you're welcome to. You don't need anything in return. Not even a free drink. The young man looked at her. For the first time, she saw something deeper in his eyes, gratitude, mixed with a small sadness she couldn't understand yet. He stood up slowly and walked to the piano. The cafe fell still. He sat down, lifting the cover with care. He placed both hands on the keys, but didn't play right away. Instead, he closed his eyes for a moment, breathing slowly, as if preparing himself, as if the music needed a quiet doorway before entering the world. When he finally pressed the first key, the sound was so soft it felt like a whisper. A gentle note, warm and steady. Then another, and another. The cafe quieted in an instant, even more than the day before. People froze, coffee cups halfway to their lips, conversation stopping mid-sentence. The melody he played today was different. Yesterday had been fast and bright, filled with energy and surprise. Today's music was slower, almost fragile, filled with emotion that no one expected. A mix of hope and longing, pain and calm. It felt like he was telling a story without words. Some customers leaned forward unconsciously. Others closed their eyes. A young woman near the counter pulled out a napkin to wipe a tear. The music changed again, flowing into something warmer, like sunlight breaking through clouds after a storm. Each note felt carefully placed, as though he was giving the world a piece of something precious, something he didn't share often. By the time the final note faded, the cafe was completely silent. No one clapped. Not because they didn't want to, but because the moment felt too delicate to break. The young man opened his eyes slowly, as if returning from somewhere far away. He looked around, unsure of what the room's reaction would be. The cafe owner stepped forward first. That was. She paused, searching for the right words. That was beautiful. The young man smiled gently. Thank you. As he stood up, a few customers approached him. They didn't crowd him or overwhelm him. They simply thanked him quietly, each one leaving a small, sincere compliment. He listened respectfully and nodded to each person. But the sadness behind his eyes didn't disappear. When he finally returned to his table, he sat alone again, staring out the window at the passing rain. The owner watched him carefully. She could sense there was more to him, a deeper story hidden behind his calm smiles and quiet voice. Something that made his music feel so honest and emotional. And she was right. Something was coming. Something he still hadn't told anyone. But soon, the truth would start to reveal itself. The rain continued falling outside, but inside the cafe, everything felt warm, soft, and strangely hopeful. People who had come for nothing more than their usual morning routine now found themselves thinking about the young man at the corner table. His music was still lingering in the air, even though the piano stood quiet now. It was the kind of silence that follows something meaningful, something a person feels even when the sound has faded. He sat with his hands folded, staring out the window as if the cloudy sky held old memories he was trying not to touch. No one disturbed him, but almost everyone watched him at least once. Not with judgment or pity, but with a gentle curiosity. The cafe owner noticed this too. She had been wiping a clean counter for several minutes, even though there was nothing left to clean. Her eyes kept drifting toward him. Something about him, his calmness, his quiet sadness, made her want to understand his story. Finally, when the lunch hour slowed down and the cafe grew quiet, she walked over to him. "Can I sit?" she asked softly. He looked up in surprise, then nodded. "Of course." She sat across from him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound came from the raindrops tapping on the glass and a soft hum from the coffee machine. "You play beautifully," she said at last. He looked down at his hands. "Thank you." It was a simple response, but she sensed something behind it, a weight he carried, but didn't want to place on anyone else. She waited, giving him space. And after a quiet laugh, he finally spoke. "I didn't plan to play in public again," he said. "Not for a long time." That caught her attention. "Why?" He hesitated, tapping the table lightly, as if choosing the right words. Music has memories, he said. And sometimes memories hurt. The owner listened carefully. She didn't push him to say more, but she didn't interrupt either. She simply let the silence sit with them. He glanced around the cafe. But this place feels different, he continued softly. It reminds me of somewhere I used to play. A small space. Warm, simple, full of people who listened even when they didn't understand. There was a tenderness in the way he said it, as if he was talking about something precious. What changed? She asked gently. He took a deep breath. Life. Sometimes it pulls a person away from what they love. The owner nodded. She didn't know his story yet, but she understood the feeling. Everyone had something life had taken away. Before she could respond, the cafe door opened and a group entered 3 people who seemed to have walked a long distance in the rain. They carried backpacks and looked tired. But the moment they entered, their eyes landed on the young man at the corner table. Their faces changed instantly. There you are, one of them said, rushing toward him. He looked startled. I told you not to follow me, he said quietly. The owner felt a jolt of surprise. She didn't know what was happening, but the cafe had shifted suddenly, like a calm lake disturbed by a sudden wave. One of the newcomers, a tall man with a tired expression, sat beside him. You disappeared without telling us. We were worried. I just needed space, the young man replied. The cafe owner stepped back a little, giving them room but still listening from a distance. A second newcomer, a soft-spoken woman, placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. You can't keep running away every time it gets heavy. He pulled his hand away slowly. I'm not running. I just needed somewhere quiet. The tall man looked around. This place? A cafe? It feels peaceful, the young man said. The woman glanced at the piano. Did you play? He didn't answer right away, but the look in his eyes was enough. A third newcomer, a shorter man with restless hands, let out a sigh. We've been trying to get you to play again for months, and now you're performing in cafes. It wasn't a performance, the young man said gently. I just played. There was a pause. The newcomers exchanged looks, each of them holding a different expression: concern, frustration, and relief all at once. The cafe owner felt her curiosity growing. She sensed the story had suddenly become deeper, more complicated. The tall man leaned in. We have a show in 2 weeks. A real show. People are waiting. They still ask about you. The young man turned his head away. I'm not ready, the woman whispered. It wasn't your fault. His hands tightened. It felt like it was, he said quietly. The cafe fell silent again. Even customers who weren't trying to listen found themselves pausing, feeling the tension without understanding it. The tall man softened his voice. You can't stay hidden forever. I'm not hiding, the young man murmured. Yes, you are, the shorter man said. You've been hiding since that night. The young man's jaw tightened, but his eyes remained calm. I just needed a place where nobody knew me. Somewhere I could touch the piano without feeling like I was breaking something. The cafe owner finally spoke. Maybe he just needs time. The group looked at her, surprised that she had joined the conversation. She continued. He didn't come here to perform. He was just a customer until yesterday. He didn't ask for attention. And he played today because people asked gently, not because they demanded it. The tall man blinked, then nodded slightly. We know. It's not about pushing him. We just don't want him to disappear. The young man sighed. I won't disappear. I just need to feel music the way I used to. Before everything got complicated. The woman looked at him with soft eyes. Then let us help you heal, not pressure you. He shook his head. You can't heal someone who doesn't know how to begin. A heavy silence filled the table. Finally, The taller man leaned back. "If you're not coming home yet, at least let us know where you are." The young man nodded. "I will." The group stood up. The woman squeezed his shoulder gently before leaving. "We care about you," she said. "I know," he replied. As they walked out into the rain, the young man let out a slow breath, as if the air in his chest had been held for too long. The cafe owner waited until the door closed, then sat across from him again. "You don't have to tell me everything," she said. "But if you want to talk, I'm here." He smiled, this time with a little more warmth. "Thank you. Most people don't say that without wanting something in return." "I don't want anything," she replied. "Your music was already more than enough." He looked at the piano. "Music used to be my home. But after a while, home didn't feel safe." She didn't push him for more. "Instead," she said gently, "maybe you'll find a way back." He nodded. Maybe. For the rest of the afternoon, he stayed quiet. But something in him felt lighter, as if simply being heard had opened a small doorway inside him. When evening came, only a few customers remained. The rain finally slowed. A soft, pale light touched the cafe windows, making everything look peaceful. The young man stood up and walked toward the piano again. The owner looked up. "Are you going to play?" she asked. He smiled gently. "Not today. Not yet." He touched the piano cover with his fingertips. "But soon. I can feel it." And with that, he gathered his things and walked out into the soft, fading light. The owner watched him go, sensing that tomorrow would bring another step, a bigger one. The young man wasn't finished with music, and music wasn't finished with him. It was still early when the sun pushed a soft glow across the quiet town, and for a moment everything felt unusually calm. The air was cool enough to make a person pause and breathe a little deeper. But even with that calm, there was something inside him that kept moving, like his heart wasn't quite ready to rest. Everything that had happened in the last few days stayed fresh in his mind, every moment. Every fear, every unexpected turn that brought him here. He walked slowly down the road, hands in his pockets, watching the world stretch awake little by little. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't trying to escape anything. He just wanted to understand what came next. After everything he had faced, the idea of tomorrow no longer felt simple. It felt bigger, heavier, almost as if the world had shifted in ways he still couldn't explain. The soft sound of footsteps came behind him, and he didn't need to look to know who it was. He could feel the presence before he heard the voice. "You're up early," she said quietly. He turned and saw her walking toward him with a gentle smile, her hair still slightly messy from sleep. It made her look more real, more human, and he couldn't help but smile back. "Couldn't sleep," he admitted. She stepped beside him and breathed in the morning air. "I don't blame you. It's been a lot." They walked together without saying much, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It felt warm, peaceful, like a moment neither of them wanted to break. It was strange how life had changed so quickly, how two people who once felt like strangers now shared something deeper than either had expected. They reached a small bench near the old fountain at the center of town. The fountain had chipped edges, and a faint hum of running water that created a soft rhythm in the air. They sat down together, shoulders close but not touching. He stared at the water. "Do you ever wonder why things happen the way they do?" he asked. She looked at him thoughtfully. "All the time. I keep thinking, if one little detail had been different, none of this would have happened. I'd still be where I was, doing what I always did. Maybe I'd still be stuck." She shook her head softly. "Maybe, but maybe life was waiting for you to step into something better." He chuckled under his breath. "Better? Are you sure?" She nudged his shoulder with a light laugh. "Don't pretend you haven't changed. I can see it." He didn't answer right away. He wasn't used to being seen, not like this, not in a way that felt honest. He had spent so long keeping parts of himself hidden that the idea of someone truly understanding him felt almost unreal. "Maybe I have changed," he said finally. "But it doesn't feel like enough." She turned toward him fully. "It doesn't have to be enough right now. You're moving, growing, choosing better things. That's already more than most people do." He kept his eyes on the fountain as he thought about her words. She had a way of making things clearer, a way of breaking through his doubt without forcing anything. It made him feel safe in a way he wasn't used to. A quiet moment passed before she spoke again. "So, what are you thinking of doing now?" He exhaled slowly. "Honestly, I don't know. I feel like I'm at a place where I could go almost anywhere, do almost anything. But that makes it hard to choose." "Well," she said lightly, "you don't have to choose alone." He glanced at her, surprised by the softness in her voice. Her eyes held something warm, something steady. "Are you saying you'd come with me?" She gave a small shrug. "I'm saying, I don't think your next steps have to be taken without support." He felt something shift inside him, something both comforting and terrifying. The kind of feeling that told him he was standing on the edge of something new. Before he could answer, a familiar voice called from the other side of the square. An older man walked toward them with a slow but steady pace, his expression warm. "There you two are," the older man said. "I had a feeling I'd find you here." The younger man stood and greeted him with a respectful nod. "Morning." The older man smiled. "Morning. I wanted to talk to you before the day gets busy." He sat down on the bench beside them, looking relaxed but thoughtful. "I've been thinking," the older man said. "You've shown a lot of heart, more than I expected. And after everything that happened, I don't want you to walk away without knowing you have options." The younger man listened carefully. "What kind of options?" he asked. "Well," the older man said, "the kind that come when someone believes in you. I think you've got something special, something people don't find often. You care, you listen, and you've earned the respect of people who didn't know you existed a few days ago." He felt heat rise in his face. Unsure how to respond, the older man continued, "If you want, I can help you start fresh. A real fresh start. A chance to build something steady." The younger man blinked slowly. "Why would you do that for me?" The older man gave a simple smile. "Because someone once did the same for me. And because sometimes a person just needs one hand to reach out before they find the strength to stand on their own." The younger man glanced at the woman beside him. She gave him a gentle nod, encouraging but not pushing. He took a deep breath. "I don't know what to say." "Say what feels true," the older man replied. He hesitated, then said quietly, "Thank you." "Good," the older man said, patting his shoulder. "That's a start." The next morning arrived with clear skies, as if the night rain had washed away every bit of heaviness the world carried. The cafe opened quietly, sunlight stretching across the floorboards in long, warm lines. It felt peaceful, almost hopeful, as though the day already knew something important was going to happen. The owner prepared everything slowly, thoughtfully. She kept glancing at the door, wondering if he would return. Since the moment he walked out yesterday evening, she had felt a strange mix of concern and anticipation. She didn't know why she cared so much, but she did. Something about him, his quiet strength, his soft sadness, made her want to see him find his way again. And right when she placed the last set of cups on the shelf, the door opened. He walked in. He looked calmer today, not completely free from whatever pain he carried, but steadier, as if he had spent the night thinking, sorting his thoughts, and letting the morning air soften the rest. "Good morning," the owner said softly. He smiled back. "Morning." He sat at his usual corner table. No attention, no grand entrance, just a young man trying to exist quietly in a world that had once become too loud for him. The cafe slowly filled with customers. Some recognized him from the earlier performances. Others had only heard whispers. But no one approached him directly. They simply watched him with respectful curiosity. The owner brought him his warm drink. "You look more peaceful today," she said. He nodded. "I feel a little lighter." "Did something happen?" she asked. He looked toward the window. "I thought about what everyone said. My friends, the people here, the music." He paused, then added softly, "I think I forgot why I started playing in the first place. It wasn't for fame or shows or pressure. It was because it made me feel alive. And yesterday, playing here, it felt like I found a small part of myself again." The owner smiled. "Maybe that's enough for today." He nodded gently, but then his eyes drifted toward the piano. The cafe fell slightly quieter, as if everyone could sense something was shifting. He looked at the owner again. "Would it be all right if I play?" Her answer was immediate. "You never have to ask." He stood slowly, taking a steady breath as he walked toward the piano. The customers turned toward him, but they kept their distance. They didn't want to overwhelm him. They simply wanted to witness whatever was about to unfold. He lifted the piano cover with care, placing his hands gently on the keys. He didn't rush. He didn't prepare a dramatic beginning. He simply breathed in, closed his eyes, and let his fingers rest for a moment. The first note was soft, so soft it felt like it floated rather than sounded. Then came another, and another. The melody grew slowly, rising like a story waking up after a long sleep. It was warm, gentle, and full of emotion that felt deeply human. His hands moved with confidence and vulnerability at the same time, as if each note carried a piece of his heart. Today's music wasn't bright like the first day, nor fragile like the second. It was something deeper, something whole. It wasn't a performance. It wasn't a show. It was healing. People leaned forward, feeling the emotion in every note. A young man near the window wiped his eyes without trying to hide it. A couple near the back held hands. The owner stood behind the counter, feeling her heart move with each rise and fall of the melody. There was no room for noise, no room for distraction. Only music, steady and honest. As he played, something changed in him. His shoulders dropped. His breathing softened. His expression eased. It was as if the music wasn't just coming from him, it was returning to him, filling places inside him that had been empty for too long. He wasn't just playing a piano, he was finding himself. The longer he played, the brighter the sunlight seemed to grow across the cafe floors. The room felt warm, almost glowing. Finally, after what felt like both a moment and a lifetime, the last note faded into the air. A deep silence followed. Then, slowly, softly, the room filled with gentle applause. Not loud, not overwhelming, just sincere. He looked up, slightly embarrassed, but touched. His eyes shone in a way they hadn't before, as if something inside him had finally opened back up. The owner stepped closer. "That was breathtaking," she said. He gave a small smile. It felt right. The cafe slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but a warm energy stayed in the air. "Peep,"